Okay, it's Wednesday the 4th of July. We're at St Andrews Church in Sutton, just west of Ely in Cambridgeshire. Now, it's ironic because we've travelled the length and breadth of the country filming various churches, and yet here we are finally back in our own patch in our own area just to film this wonderful church. Now, this, for me personally, this is where it all began, because back in 1820, Rose Eagle married Lord Gowler Neville, or rather Lord Gowler Neville married Rose Eagle. Now originally, as we know at that point in time, the Neville family were based in Uckfield in Essex, and we know that we had Lyme House and the other various properties all around the main central parts of London. But obviously Gowler met Rose, and Rose was a local lady that lived in this area, and so they actually got married in this church, I say, in 1820. We shouldn't forget, mind you, that the Neville family were only here in this area for a total of 97 years. So in the relevance of space and time, it's quite a small chunk of time, 97 years. But still, it's quite important to document and note that. Now, the church itself, most people say most of its developments in 1671. The church goes back much further. It goes back to the Norman times, and much more importantly to the Norman conquest in 1066, as most people know about the Norman conquest. Now, obviously the church had some pretty upheaval times during the Norman conquest, and it obviously didn't look like it does today. But things started to settle down, as we well know, in England by 1348. And it really settled down by Mother Nature giving a helping hand, I guess, because anyone who knows the history will know that the Black Death came to England at that point in time. The Rose Eagle, she was born in 1808 and died in 1876. Now, as we know, as I said, she married Gowler in 1820, which means that she had 46 years of marriage, which back in that day was quite rare to have that length of time in marriage, because people obviously were dying younger due to various health issues, lack of knowledge of nutrition, and all the other parts that go with it. Sanitation will be a main key part as well back in the 1800s. We know that sanitation didn't start to improve until coming into the Victorian times, when we started to see the improvement there. So Rose herself was a fairly local lady, as I said. She was very charismatic, and she obviously caught the eye of Gowler Neville very, very quickly. For him to take up roots from Uckfield in Essex and move up to here to make this his home, and actually where the marriage took place, that's a pretty major step back in those days, because it's not like getting in a car and driving down to Uckfield from here that will take an hour and a half with heavy traffic. You know, that'll be days to get here. You know, it's a major challenge. So very interesting in regards to Rose. How quaint that St Andrews Church, we know St Andrews connected to Scotland, very much so. And we see the crosses very much in the avenue there as well. Now, when we go to one of the other churches, we'll be talking much more about the Scottish lines into this part of Cambridgeshire, which probably a lot of people don't know about. But it's so important when we go back to that period, especially to King Charles, as it were. King Charles I in particular. But we'll talk about that when we get to his church and his town, his imaginary town of Manea. But at the moment we're in Sutton, as it were. Witchford even, sorry. We're in Witchford. And it's covered by all the parishes of Sutton, Witchford, Haddenham, all the areas. So they all work as like a joint PCC, the various vicars that are around. Sadly, this church is normally locked for vandalism and things as well. But it does open every day from about 4 o'clock till 5, so I am told, but we got a key given to us today. Look at that wonderful dove of peace, and look at the colours that are so radiant, the yellows, the blues, the reds, the grey, the silver. So significant indeed to have the dove, as we know. And very much, if you look at it carefully, the dove's head is actually resting on a Templar, a Knights Templar cross. Although you can only see sort of 3 points of the cross, as it were, 3 sides of the cross. Certainly evident in the graveyard as well, of some Templar activity. we know that the Templars were here very big time in that moment in time. This is quite nice. It's from the more modern period, and it was given to the church in 1951, which I think is absolutely beautiful. It's the alleged Mary and the baby. So, which I do, again, I like the colours that they've used on there. The blue of truth and the white of innocence. So that I find particularly nice as well. Like a lot of churches, it's had a lot of revamp over the years, which has sadly probably spoiled a bit of its time, really. There's some lovely pieces of artwork going along up the top there. I don't think we really need to show them today because we're going to see some absolutely superior artworks in the other churches we're about to go to. But I say this was a starting point for today because of Rose Eagle, which is such an unusual surname in the area, which is absolutely really good. Now, this I find interesting as well. It's relatively modern. We've got blue and red triangles there, which again is quite significant. And obviously this chap, Ebenezer Moxon Allen, in 1955, you know, this 30 years as a church warden here. But I do find it nice with the mason with his mallet, which, you know, one could imply that is connected to Freemasonry, but we don't know that for sure. But it's still rather a nice piece to see. What we do know is connected to Freemasonry and, more importantly, to Knights Templar. Let's not put the both of them in bed together. We know that they are two separate groups. We come down here and we see that wonderful. Now this just screams to me. I think it's probably the best piece in the entire church, in my mind. Because there's so much going on in that particular aspect here, up on the window. Just over here, we see the fleur-de-lis, we see the wonderful blue Templar cross in the centre, and then we've got those wonderful red spikes coming out. Now that just screams to me what we call circle of 8, and that very much screams to me. The first thing I saw when I looked at that was, circle of 8. For anyone who doesn't know what the Circle of 8 means, it's about certain points of piety, but it has many other meanings as well. So, church is really nice. We're now going to go on to our next church in the quest and the line. This is quest 25, we know that already. So we've seen, it's quite nice to be back on what I call local familiar ground momentarily before we venture over to Ireland in late August this year. Okay, we're at St Andrews Church in Sutton, and yet another St Andrews Church. So you can see the influence that the Scots had on this particular area. And it's no surprising when we go back in history. The church was actually, a lot of people will say different dates, but we're looking at 1356, the year 1356. And in particular, obviously, it had lots of renovation. Now, Janice has taken some really nice photographs inside of my 3 times great-grandfather's sort of recognition, I guess. The Neville Shield is inside very much. Modest shield, nevertheless. It's not like some of the others we've seen in various other places of the country, the length and breadth. But, needless to say, James is actually mentioned here. We've just been over to James's grave as well, which is quite interesting, because ironically, I probably should have been here sooner, because I only live fairly round the corner. And he's got a very nice Templar cross. It's a very basic grave, admittingly. But he was although he was born in Witchford, James Neville, he actually died and was buried in Sutton, which is a little bit interesting for the area. And there's a lot of reasons, I suppose. That's probably why I'm always drawn back to this particular area of Cambridgeshire, because there's a 97-year window period of calmness, I guess, in the family line, and the calmness was in this part of the area. So much so with Mepal and Manea and those sort of areas as well. So the church's really good. There's a stone, I say, inside that's not that old, but of high significance, especially in the Templar world, regards to the statue, and that's a Victorian statue honouring the St Wendrida. and Ethelreda in particular. Now, there's not a lot of mention about Ethelreda, as it were, but Ethelreda is the saint that goes into Newmarket as well. And when we look at St Ethelreda's Lodge and St Wendred Lodge and all those saints around the area, it's no surprise that we have the link there to the statue here of the Victorian time itself. Beautiful church. They call it the Cathedral of the Fens, or the Cathedral of the Isle. Now, we know that Ely's just down the road with that magnificent cathedral, but one thing that's really important to note, this piece of land is much more historical than Ely Cathedral. This was here and being used for a multitude of things, eons before Ely Cathedral was even thought about. So that's important to know that. Yet sadly, Ely got the upper hand for whatever reason, and they developed that area. But that's why it's got such a feel of the cathedral inside of this church, is because it really was meant to be of a cathedral stance, and it certainly feels that way. Okay, well, it's St Mary's Church in the village of Mepal. Such a wonderful little church, lots of history. Now, this one goes back to the Saxon times, and the ground's been used for millennia, really, to be fair. It's interesting that when you look at the landscape, it's hard to imagine how it would have looked like even 200 years ago. But the church owned all the land, and we can certainly see that outside. I know my friend Janice has took a picture of the building across the field there. Sadly, a lot of it's been renovated, or had to be renovated because of ill health on here. It's a shame because it doesn't look like it's in a lot of use at the moment. But you know, at the end of the day, it's only as good as the people in the village, I guess, that want to access and use it. You'll see here on one of the actual kneelers, one of the cushions, we've got the RAF symbol. Well, as we know, Mepal was a thriving area in World War II because the fighter squadron, the Australian Battalion Fighter Squadron, was based here under RAF Mepal. Now, it's quite hard to think that that wasn't that many years ago, and people forget the history. So at Witchford, we had the RAF bombers, battalion squadrons, and then here at Mepal, we had the fighters. So this area was very much involved in the war, and it's interesting to note that only 4 people, I know it's 4 too many, but only 4 people actually died in the Great War of the First World War from here that have been noted, which we can see: Private Constable, Private Hall, Private Palmer and Private Sykes. Now, Private Sykes has a very interesting family line in the area and has done for many, many years. Not so much in modern time, but in the past was a very influential family. So I'm not quite sure which Sykes was involved in the First World War, the Great War there, but there we are. You can see here, over here, which is amazing, it's probably one of the only pieces left in the church now, which is the wonderful piece of Ave Maria. And it's original, it's nice, it's about 300 years old. It's not older than that, but it's still here. And I think that's really important to note that it is still here. She would have replaced a more earlier Norman-style, Saxon-style statue. And what was here originally would have been a knight, and the knight would be holding the sword, and he would be looking in that direction. So slightly different to the way Ave Maria is looking. She's looking sort of in this direction. The knight was looking in that direction. So there's a slight difference there. But 300 years later, and you know, it's still here, which is amazing. As we can see, a lot of the windows haven't got stained glass on them, but then back in the day they didn't do it. Some of them are replacements though, but some of just originally would be clear. As you can see, just directly behind us, or the stained glass window there, putting at a better elevation of it from there. Interesting, you've got the trees, the tree of life, you've got the tunnel, the cave in the distance. I don't know if anyone can see that there when they look at the video clip. But we can see the tunnel, we can see the Jesus, or the purported Jesus, basically pointing upwards to the sky. And interesting enough, there's a lovely red stone, which would be the representation of garnet in the triangle. Now, I don't know how many can see the triangle there, but when we go up, we see the golden leaf there, and we follow the perpendicular we follow the triangle down, and then we've got the red pearl in the middle, which is the garnet. So garnet's always been a favourite stone of original Christianity, really, and it always will be, I guess. So it's always been a tempter of sin. There's not much more I can say about the church. It's lovely. It's worth a visit. I say it just doesn't look like it's being used a great deal, but it's certainly being kept okay. There is a wonderful part at the front I just want to show you, which is also quite interesting to see. And as you can see from the distance it's taken me, the church isn't that big. It's more the size of a chapel. And that would be representative of the village itself. And if we know anything about Mepal, then the village was never that big, but they made sure there was an area for them to use. Under here is one of the tombs of one of the past vicars, which is interesting. Oddly, it actually holds the same initials as my learned friend, Janice. So you've got JF there, and the year 1719. It's important to note that Mepal itself had really large financial ties with Newmarket. And we know that from the Vipins, V-I-P-I-N surname, and they had a very large influence from Newmarket as well. So the whole area was very much in bed with each other, whereas today it seems as if the villages are very separated from each other. But back then, people knew all the villages in the area, all the different districts, and they met at Sunday Mass and different things, so that's quite interesting. You've got here, again, one of the lovely originals. I don't know if anyone can read that, but the above and of Sophia, his wife. So that's quite interesting. Now, we've got there 16th, 1846, died at Malta. Bearing in mind, this is Darrant Dalbeny, who died in Malta, and his wife was Sophia. Well, we know that the Malta is a total Knights Templar connection. We know that Sophia is a name of the Templars, and most importantly, we also know that the particular surname involved is part of the Templars as well, so that's quite interesting to see. We're at St Nicolas Church in Manea, and this is one of the most important churches, yet we can't get into it, so perhaps another day we will come back and see it. But what's interesting about Manea is that originally this should have been the new city, and we're talking back to the year of 1625, when King Charles I was King of England. Now bear in mind, Charles I comes from the Scottish line down. Now, as anyone who knows the wars and then later on the War of the Roses, King Charles I had his mind set on Manea being transformed into the next city of the Fens. So when we look at Ely, as it were, we should see that Ely shouldn't really be the city. We go back to the actual years, as it were. Now, we know from King Charles that 1625 he was here and wanted to call Manea Charlemont, or Charlemont, but it was actually going to be called Charlemont, C-H-A-R-L-E-M-O-N-T, Charlemont. And so really this village was meant to be the new city, the new vibrant place of Charlemont. As we know, he was executed in 1649. And what's interesting about that is that he was, during his imprisonment, once he was captured and thrown from the throne, he was actually imprisoned on the Isle of Wight, to where he was executed on the Isle of Wight. So it was only some 11 years later that his son, King Charles II, would be brought back to the throne. Now, we know that the monarchy was abolished in 1649, and for those 11 years, this entire land was known as the Commonwealth of England, which is really important to mention. Now, the monarchy was wrongly restored back in 1660, as I said, to Charles II, the son of Charles I. Then later on we would see the War of the Roses starting to unfold. Regards to the church, it's been here, again, landmark for many, many years. Regards to Manea, there was a reason why King Charles I wanted to make this Charlemont. He was trying to make it the next King Arthur legend, basically.
and we hear about the myth and legends, we can connect this area, oddly, to Trethevey and to St Knightston's Keeve, right down south. And how they're connected, I'll leave that for you to work out and decide, but there's a direct connection between here, St Knightston's Keeve, and right up in a place called Atholl in Scotland, Atholl, Atholl in Scotland. And those three are combined and very much linked on the chain. So, and we can take it backwards and backwards in time to the story of Mary Magdalene. We can talk about the Black Madonna, the rescued child by Mary, and we can talk about the Christ as well, in many respects. But there is a distinct reason why King Charles I was in Manea, liked Manea, and wanted to make it the new place called Charlemont, as I say. So that's interesting to look up if you ever get time.